Maribel was lifting the evening lantern inside the Harmon freight office when three well-dressed men shut the door behind her and laid a torn letter on the counter like a noose. By sunrise, the whole town would be told she had stolen railroad money, tempted a married clerk, and forged the paper that was meant to carry her west to a new life. No one saw the pistol hidden beneath the account book. No one heard the clerk whisper that the road outside town could bury a woman's name forever. And no one expected a dust-covered rancher to open that door before shame finished its work. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. The sun went down slow over Calico Bend, dragging long strips of gold across the railroad tracks and making every window in town burn, as if fire had been banked behind the glass. The evening train had not yet whistled from the east. Horses stamped in front of the livery. Dust hung in the street. Somewhere beyond the church, a woman called her children in for supper, and the bell over Harmon Freight's front door gave one tired little ring as Maribel stepped inside with her lantern pole in hand. She was 19, though hardship had set a quieter age in her eyes. Folks in town called her the Lantern Girl because she lit the lamps along the depot walk, at the freight platform, and inside the ticket room after Mr. Harmon's rheumatism grew too cruel for ladder work. Her father had once done the same job, walking the rails at dusk with a red globe signal lamp and a whistle tucked in his coat. He had died 2 winters ago in a freezing rain, trying to flag down a runaway freight car before it struck the passenger platform. Since then, Myra had kept his route. She took pride in it. She did not say so out loud, for pride in a poor girl was called foolishness by those who owned more than one coat. But every evening when she touched flame to wick and watched darkness step back, she felt as though she had done one small honest thing the world could not soil. That night should have been her last week in Calico Bend. In the pocket of her faded blue dress was a letter from Mrs. Ellery Boone of St. Joseph, offering her a position as assistant dressmaker and a room over the shop. It was not grand, but to Mara it was a future. It meant wages paid in full. It meant bolts of cloth, not carried as freight, but cut by her own hands. It meant no longer sleeping in the little lean-to room behind the depot, where the walls smelled of coal smoke and damp lumber. At the counter, Mr. Norris Pike, the freight clerk, was adding columns in a ledger with the tip of his tongue caught between his teeth. He was a narrow man with a clean collar and eyes that never rested where they first landed. "You are late," he said. "The sun is still up, Mr. Pike." "Do not answer as if you were raised in a saloon." Myra lowered her eyes, though there was nothing saloon-made in her answer. She crossed to the wall bracket and lit the first lamp. The flame caught, trembled, and steadied. Outside, a wagon rolled past, the iron rims grinding over stones. Inside, the freight office smelled of lamp oil, ink, leather, and damp rope. 2 other men stood near the scale. Judd Mercer, owner of the feed store, and Silas Creel, who ran card tables out of the back room of the Cattleman's Rest. Both dressed better than they worked. Both had laughed at Mara before in the street, when she carried parcels too heavy for her arms. Tonight, they did not laugh. That frightened her more. Mr. Pike closed the ledger. "Shut the back door," he told Judd. Mara's hand paused around the match. Judd slid the bolt. Silas moved in front of the window, blocking the last wash of sun. "What is this?" Mara asked. Mr. Pike reached under the counter and placed an envelope on the wood. It was torn across one corner. The handwriting on the front was hers. Mara knew it at once. Her letter to Mrs. Boone. The answer had come 3 days ago with a ticket receipt folded inside, stamped and paid for. She had left it hidden under her mattress, wrapped in muslin beside $6 and her mother's thimble. Her throat tightened. "Where did you get that?" "Where thieves leave things," Pike said. "Among stolen money. I stole nothing." He opened the envelope and took out the letter. It had been cut and pasted clumsily into sentences that were not her own. Her name remained at the bottom, but above it were words asking for money, promising silence, mentioning freight receipts and private ledgers. Mara stared at it, unable to breathe. That is not my letter. Silas gave a soft whistle. Pretty hand for an ugly business? Judd leaned on the scale. A girl alone gets ideas above herself. New dresses, train tickets, city dreams. I earn my passage, Mara said. Her voice shook, but she kept standing. Mrs. Boone sent for me. Pike's face changed. For one moment the clean clerk disappeared, and something meaner looked through. No one sent for you. No decent woman wants a freight rat handling silk. Mara flinched as though he had struck her. Then she saw the pistol. It lay half hidden beneath the open ledger, the grip turned toward Pike's right hand. Her father had taught her to notice things in lamplight. A rail nail missing, a horse sweating without cause, a man looking at a door too often. Pike was looking at the back door. What do you want from me? She whispered. Judd took a folded paper from his coat. It was old, yellowed at the creases, marked with lines and a smudged symbol that looked like a crooked wheel. Your father knew the old freight road north of town, she said. The one that runs through Split Rock Draw and comes out near the dry crossing. That road washed out before I was born. Not all of it. I do not know it. Silas stepped closer. Then you had better remember, Lantern Girl. By tomorrow, half the town will believe you forged papers and reached for Pike's cash drawer. By Sunday, the church ladies will cross the road to avoid your shadow. A girl with a ruined name does not get hired in St. Joseph. Mara pressed her fingers into the lantern pole until the metal bit her skin. Pike spoke gently then, which was worse than anger. Help us find the pass your father used, and perhaps your letter is not shown around. Perhaps the sheriff is told you misunderstood a few matters. Perhaps you keep what little name you have. The room seemed to tilt. Outside, a horse stopped at the hitch rail. Spurs touched the boardwalk. The bell over the front door rang. Thomas Vale stepped into the freight office with dust on his hat, a coil of fence wire over one shoulder, and the stillness of a man who had spent too many seasons listening for trouble before it arrived. He was 32, broad through the chest, sun-browned, and known in Calico Bend as a quiet rancher who paid in silver and did not linger in saloons. His spread lay west of town, where the prairie lifted toward low cedar hills. Folks said his wife had died 5 years earlier on the trail, and that after burying her, he had built fences the way some men built walls. Mara had seen him often enough. He came for lamp oil, nails, flour, axle grease. He always tipped his hat to her, not as men tipped hats to pretty girls, but as one working soul to another. Once, when a crate of horseshoes split open on the platform, he knelt without being asked and helped gather every shoe. Now, he looked from Mara's white face to the bolted back door, then to Pike's hand, resting too near the ledger. I came for my wire, Thomas said. Pike smiled too quickly. Office is closed. Door was open. It is closed now. Thomas did not move. His gaze settled on Mara. Miss Bell, she wanted to speak. She wanted to say his name, to ask him to stay, to tell him that these men had stolen the future from under her mattress and were holding it against her like a blade. But Pike's finger slid closer to the pistol, so Mara did the only thing she could. She lifted the lantern, turned as if to hang it, and let the flame pass close to the red glass signal lamp on the shelf behind the counter. Her father had used that lamp for danger. Thomas saw it. His face did not change, but something in him sharpened. Mr. Pike, he said, I will take my freight now. Silas laughed. You hard of hearing? No. Thomas set the coil of wire down. I hear well enough. The freight office grew so quiet Mara heard a horse blow outside, heard the stove tick as it cooled, heard her own pulse knocking in her ears. Then the train whistle came from the east, long and lonely, and with it came voices from the platform. Travelers, porters, men unloading crates. The hidden threat inside the freight office loosened, but it did not leave. Pike folded the forged letter and slipped it into his coat. "Tomorrow morning," he murmured to Myra, "when the whole town stands at the platform, we will see what your word is worth." Thomas took his crate of wire. He did not look back until he reached the door. "Myra," he said, using her given name for the first time, "the evening air is rough. Walk out with me." Every man in that office heard the offer. Every man understood it as a line drawn in dust. Myra took her lantern and followed him into the last light of the day. But behind her, she heard Judd Mercer whisper, "Let her walk." Roads have two ends. By morning, the whole town knew a story. It traveled faster than the milk wagon and dirtier than the creek after rain. Myra Bell had stolen from Harmon Freight. Myra Bell had written indecent letters to Norris Pike. Myra Bell had been carrying on with gamblers. Myra Bell had forged a recommendation to get work in St. Joseph. By the time the first rooster called beyond the blacksmith shop, her name had been dragged through every kitchen in Calico Bend. She had slept little. Thomas had walked her to the small room behind the depot and stood outside until she latched the door. He asked no questions she was too shaken to answer. He only said, "Keep a chair under the knob," and left his own pocket knife on the window ledge folded close. At dawn, when Myra stepped onto the platform with two lamps to clean, Mrs. Heskett from the boarding house turned her face away. A pair of boys whispered and snickered near the mail sacks. Even old Mr. Harmon, who had known her father, avoided her eyes. Norris Pike stood under the depot awning, wearing a solemn expression fit for a funeral. Judd Mercer and Silas Creel flanked him like witnesses at a trial. The sheriff came last. Sheriff Abel Russ was not a cruel man, but he was tired, and tired men often chose the easiest truth. Pike handed him the torn letter. Judd spoke of missing freight payments. Silas claimed he had seen Myra near the cash drawer after hours. Pike said he had tried to spare the girl embarrassment, but could no longer ignore dishonesty. Myra stood with lamp suit on her fingers and listened to strangers decide what kind of woman she was. "That letter is cut apart," she said, when the sheriff finally faced her. "Someone changed it?" Pike sighed. "She is frightened, Sheriff." "I am angry," Myra said. A few heads turned. A woman gasped softly, as if anger itself were proof of guilt. Sheriff Rusk examined the paper. "Miss Bell, do you have the original correspondence from this Mrs. Boone?" "I was taken from my room." "And the money taken with it?" Pike's brows rose. How convenient. The humiliation struck then, not as fire, but as coal. Myra saw her future shrinking before her. No train ticket, no position, no place in town, no defense that would be believed against men with polished boots and ledgers. Thomas Vale rode in while Pike was still speaking. He dismounted beside the platform, tied his horse, and climbed the steps without hurry. He wore the same dust-colored coat as the night before. There was a small cut near his knuckle, as though he had worked by lamplight, long after leaving town. "Sheriff," he said. Russ nodded. "So, miss, I was in the freight office last evening." Pike's mouth tightened. Thomas removed his hat. Door was bolted. Miss Bell was inside with 3 men. She looked afraid. Silas scoffed. "A woman can look afraid when caught." Thomas turned his eyes on Silas. She did not look caught. She looked cornered. The platform murmured. Pike spread his hands. Mr. Vale came in at the end of a private matter. "He cannot know." "I know a pistol was under your ledger," Thomas said. Silence fell hard. Pike's face colored. "I keep a weapon for protection. Freight offices hold money." Then why hide it while questioning an armed girl? No one answered. The sheriff looked between them. "Myra, until I can sort this out, I cannot let you leave town." Those words struck harder than accusation. Her train to St. Joseph would come that afternoon. Mrs. Boone would expect her in 2 days. No letter could be sent without postage. No postage without money. Even if she were cleared later, later was a country too far away. Pike knew it. He looked almost pleased. Thomas saw it too. She can work at my place, he said. Mara turned to him. Russ frowned. That is not your concern. It becomes my concern if you mean to leave her alone in that room behind the depot, with men already bold enough to bolt doors around her. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. She is not under arrest, but she remains available for questions. She will be available, Thomas said. 8 die my ranch. A stir went through the gathered townsfolk. A young woman living at a widower's ranch would feed talk for a month. Mara felt the shame of it before anyone spoke. Mrs. Haskett whispered, not softly enough. From freight girl to ranch house. Quick step. Mara's cheeks burned. Thomas heard it. So did everyone. He stepped to the edge of the platform and faced the town with his hat in his hands. My housekeeper left in April to tend her sister. I need cooking, mending, lamp work, and a woman's hand for accounts. I will pay wages fair, and Mrs. Calder from the church can ride out twice weekly. If propriety worries anyone more than justice. The mention of Mrs. Calder changed the air. She was 70, stern, and feared by gossips from the church door to the cemetery gate. Mara looked down at her soot-dark fingers. You do not owe me this? No, Thomas said quietly, but I owe the truth room to breathe. The sheriff allowed it, though grudgingly. Pike smiled, as if he had merely adjusted his plan. Silas leaned close when Myra stepped past. Roads are lonely west of town, he murmured. Lanterns go out there. Thomas's hand closed around Silas' sleeve before Myra could move. He did not yank him. He did not threaten loudly. He only held the gambler still. Say another word to her, Thomas said, and you will answer it where men can see. Silas pulled free, but the smirk had slipped. Mara gathered what little she owned from the depot room. 2 dresses, a comb, her mother's thimble, her father's red signal lamp, and the empty muslin cloth where her savings had been. She left behind the cot, the cracked basin, and the nail where her St. Joseph letter had once hung like a promise. As Thomas lifted her bundle into the wagon, the afternoon train came in. Steam rolled white along the platform. The conductor called for boarding. For one wild moment, Myra nearly ran to it on faith alone. Then she remembered she had no ticket, no letter, no name, clean enough to carry with her. The train pulled away without her. She stood in the dust and watched it vanish eastward, taking the sound of her future with it. Thomas did not tell her not to cry. He did not speak of patience or God's plan or the way things might get men. He only waited until the last car disappeared beyond the bend. Then he climbed onto the wagon seat and held the reins loosely. The road to my place is rough, he said. Mara looked down the west road toward prairie wind and uncertain shelter. Behind her stood a town ready to believe the worst. Before her sat a man who had risked his own name before asking for anything in return. Road is still a road, she answered. And together they left Calico Bend under a sky filling with storm-colored clouds. The Vale Ranch lay 12 miles west beyond wheat stubble, low draws, and a creek lined with cottonwoods. By the time they reached it, evening had come again. The ranch house stood plain and square against the prairie, with a barn to the north, a windmill creaking in the yard, and long fences fading into blue distance. It was not a rich spread, but it was kept with care. The gates swung true. The woodpile was stacked tight. The horses in the corral lifted their heads as Thomas drove in, and one old bay gave a low nicker that sounded almost like greeting. Mara climbed down, stiff from the ride. The air smelled of hay, rain, horse sweat, and supper smoke from a chimney gone cold. Thomas carried her bundle to the porch and stopped before opening the door. My wife's things are put away, he said, not looking at her. The small room off the kitchen is clean. You might bolt it from inside. Myra understood the kindness in telling her that first. Thank you. He nodded once and stepped in. The house was spare but not empty. A braided rug lay before the hearth. A shelf held tin plates, 2 blue cups, a Bible, a worn book of cattle records, and a small framed photograph turned slightly toward the wall. Dried lavender hung near the stove, brittle and gray with age. Myra noticed the lamps at once. 3 had smoked chimneys. 1 wick was cut uneven. The kitchen lantern had been filled too high and leaked oil down the side. You need help, she said before thinking. Thomas looked at the lantern, then at her. For the first time since she had known him, a tired, almost smile touched his mouth. I did mention lamp work. She set her bundle down and rolled up her sleeves. That first week did not heal anything. Healing was too fine a word for the labor that followed. Myra woke before dawn, made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, kneaded biscuits, scrubbed lamp glass, mended torn saddle blankets, and wrote freight figures in Thomas's account book while he dictated from receipts. In the afternoons, she helped gather eggs from hens that disliked her, pumped water until her shoulders ached, and learned which horse would nip and which only pretended. Thomas did not hover. He gave instructions plainly and thanked her when a task was done. He never stood too close. He never entered the kitchen room after sunset. Each Friday, he placed her wages in an envelope and set it on the table before breakfast, though she protested the first time. I cannot take this while I owe you shelter. You work, he said. Work earns wages. The simple justice of it nearly broke her. Mrs. Calder came on the second day, riding side saddle on a mule as stubborn as she was. She inspected the room, the pantry, the wash line, and Thomas with equal suspicion. You got any foolish notions, Thomas Vale? No, ma'am. You, Myra Bell? No, ma. Good. Foolish notions waste flour. After that, she came twice a week and made certain the town had no easy scandal to chew. She also brought news. Pike was pressing the sheriff to file charges. Judd Mercer claimed 2 freight invoices had vanished. Silas was asking questions at the saloon about old survey maps. A stranger with a scarred cheek had been seen riding north along Split Rock Draw. At the name, Thomas grew still. Myra noticed. You know that place? My north fence runs near it. I there, no freight road there. Pieces of one, mostly washed and choked with cedar. He closed the account book. Why? Myra told him then what Pike and the others had asked. She told him about the folded paper, the crooked wheel mark, the threat that roads had 2 ends. She told him of her father's stories, how he once hauled signal oil by wagon before the railroad extended west, how he knew every dry crossing and cutbank between Calico Bend and the foothills. She remembered one thing more. When she was little, her father had carved a small wheel mark on the underside of the table and said, If ever you are lost, my belle, look for the wheel that does not turn. Thomas listened without interruption. Your name is my belle? He asked when she finished. She looked away. Only my father called me that. I will not. The respect in that quiet promise settled somewhere deep. Trust began not with sweet words, but with a broken fence. A blue norther blew in at the end of the week, hard enough to make the barn doors groan. Thomas came in near dusk with his coat wet through and blood on one sleeve. Myra stood from the stove. You are hurt? Wire caught me. That is not wire blood. Sit. I have cattle loose, and you will lose more blood than cattle if you fall from the saddle. He looked ready to argue, then sat, because sense was stronger than pride. Myra cleaned a long cut along his forearm and wrapped it with strips torn from an old sheet. Her hands were steady. She had done the same for her father many times. Who taught you? Thomas asked. My father. Railmen bleed often. When the bandage was tied, he flexed his fingers. Good work. Outside, the wind slammed rain against the windows. Mara listened to the storm, then reached for her shawl. Where is the fence? No, you cannot mend it alone. You are not going out in this. You hired me for work, Mr. Vale, not porcelain. He stared at her, and something like admiration crossed his tired face. They went together. The storm had turned the yard to black mud. Thomas carried a lantern, but the wind kept trying to kill it. Mara took it from him, cupped the glass with her body, and walked ahead, finding the path as if she had been born to hold light against weather. They reached the north pasture, where 3 steers milled near a sagging break in the wire. Thomas drove posts while Mara held the lantern low, rain running from her braid skirts heavy with mud. At one point, a steer lunged through the gap. Thomas stepped between it and Mara, slipped and went to one knee. She seized the loose wire with both hands and pulled it tight, ignoring the barbs that bit through her gloves. Now, she shouted. Thomas hammered the staple home. They stood there, breathing hard in the rain, the lantern between them. Their faces lit gold, while the rest of the prairie roared dark. You saved half my herd from wandering into the draw, he said. You saved my name from being buried before trial. Your name is not buried. In town, it is. Town is not the whole world. She wanted to believe him. Under the storm, with mud on her dress and his blood on her bandage work, it almost seemed possible. When they returned to the house, he placed her father's red signal lamp on the kitchen table. You should keep this filled. I do. Good. A light like that might be needed before all this is done. The next morning, when Mara emptied her torn gloves, a small shaving of old wood fell from the cuff. It must have lodged there when she grabbed the fence post near the draw. On it was a carved mark, darkened by age, a crooked wheel. The 4th Sunday after Mara came to the ranch, the church bell rang under a clean sky, and Thomas drove her into town because hiding had begun to feel too much like guilt. Calico Ben watched them arrive. Women turned on the church steps. Men stopped talking near the hitch rail. Norris Pike stood beside Judd Mercer in a black coat too fine for dust. Silas Creel leaned against the saloon porch, rolling a toothpick between his lips. Mara wore a brown dress she had mended at the cuffs and a bonnet Mrs. Calder insisted upon. Her stomach tightened as she stepped down from the wagon. Thomas came around to her side, not touching her, but near enough that no one could pretend she stood alone. Inside the church, Reverend Ames preached from Micah about doing justice and loving mercy. Mara heard little of it. She felt every glance. When the congregation rose to sing, her voice would not come. After service, Pike approached with Sheriff Rusk. Miss Bell, the sheriff said, I need to ask again about the missing invoices. Mara lifted her chin. Asked. Pike's eyes shone with false regret. 3 more documents have been found with her handwriting. Thomas said, Show them. Pike handed over papers bearing neat figures and notes. At first glance, the writing did resemble Mara's. But Mara had copied freight tags for 2 years. She knew her own habits. That is not mine, she said. Pike sighed. Again, Mara pointed to a number. I cross my 7s, always. That hand does not, and the ink is wrong. Mr. Harmon uses blue-black. This is iron gall from Mercer's store. Judd reddens. Half the town buys ink from me. Thomas took the paper. My eye. The sheriff allowed it. Thomas studied the page longer than anyone expected. These figures list freight moving on the North Spur. Yes, Pike said, where payments went missing. The North Spur has been closed 6 months. The sheriff frowned. Thomas continued. Flood took the trestle in March. No cattle, no lumber, no freight through there since. Pike's mouth tightened. A clerical note might be mistaken. Then your accusation rests on mistaken papers. The crowd stirred. For the first time, Sheriff Rusk looked uncertain. Then Silas called from the saloon porch, loud enough for all to hear. Ask her about the old road. Ask why a lantern girl keeps poking near Split Rock after dark. Mara went cold. Thomas turned slowly. How would you know who rides near Split Rock after dark? Silas smiled. Men see things. Men do things too, Thomas said. Before more could be said, a boy came running from the depot, waving his cap. Sheriff, Sheriff! Mr. Harmon's storeroom then broke open. Everyone moved at once. The freight office door stood wide. Inside, crates had been shoved aside, papers scattered, a lamp broken on the floor. Mr. Harmon trembled near the counter, his white hair wild. My old records, he said. The accident reports, Bell's papers, all gone. Mara's breath caught. Me father's papers. Harmon looked at her with grief. I kept them after he died. His route books, his maps. I meant to give them to you when you left. When I left, Mara repeated, and the words hurt. Pike rushed in behind them. You see, she knew records were here. She wanted them destroyed. Thomas stepped between Mara and him, or someone feared what they show. Sheriff Russ looked at the broken lock, then at the scattered room. No one leaves town today, but someone already had. A stable boy swore he had seen Judd Mercer's gray team heading north before service ended. Silas had vanished from the saloon porch. Pike claimed he had been in church the whole time, which was true enough to be useful and false enough to matter. Thomas found one thing under the edge of the freight counter. A drop of red sealing wax impressed with a crooked wheel. Mara recognized the symbol from the old wood shaving. Her father had not merely known the road, he had marked it. That evening, back at the ranch, Mara sat at Thomas's kitchen table with her father's signal lamp before her. The red glass glowed though it was unlit. Thomas spread a rough map beside it, drawing from memory. Calico Bend, the broken North Spur, Split Rock Draw, the dry crossing, the old freight trace. If they took your father's route books, he said, they are looking for a way around the wash trestle. Why, next week, the railroad payroll comes by guarded car. If the North Spur is closed, everyone expects it to stay on the main line. But there is an old transfer point beyond Split Rock. A wagon could meet the train where it slows for the grade, take the strong box, and vanish by the freight road. Mara looked at the crooked line. And blame me with forged papers. Yes, yeah. Because my father knew the road. And because you are easier to ruin than a man with a store, a saloon, or a clerk's collar. The truth was plain and bitter. A sound came from outside. Both turned. A horse snorted near the barn. Though Thomas's horses were in the south corral, he rose and took his rifle from the pegs. Mara lifted the kitchen lantern. They stepped onto the porch. The night was moonless. Wind moved through the grass with a dry whisper. From the barn came the faint scrape of wood. Thomas motioned for Mara to stay, but she followed at a distance, holding the lantern low. They found the barn door open. Inside, feed sacks had been cut. The tack room was ransacked. On the floor, pinned beneath a horseshoe, lay Mara's missing St. Joseph letter. For a moment, she could only stare. Thomas picked it up gently. The original writing was there, whole and honest, with Mrs. Boone's seal on the bottom. The ticket receipt was gone. Across the back of the letter, in Pike's tidy hand, someone had written, "Bring the Bell girl to Split Rock by sundown tomorrow, or the sheriff gets enough proof to hang her name for good." Mara read it twice. Then the barn loft creaked. Thomas shoved her back just as a shot blasted from above. The bullet struck the lantern, shattering glass and throwing flame into the straw. The barn caught like breath to tinder. Thomas fired once toward the loft. A man cursed and scrambled out the rear opening. Mara seized a horse blanket and beat at the growing fire while Thomas dragged burning straw away from the stalls. Horses screamed. Smoke swallowed the rafters. "Get out!" Thomas shouted. "Not without the horses." Together they cut ropes, flung open stalls, and drove the panicked animals into the yard. Mara's hair singed at the ends. Thomas coughed black smoke. The roof beam cracked above them. The last horse, the old bay, refused to move. Mara grabbed her father's red signal lamp from where she had dropped it outside. lit it from a fallen ember, and held the red glow before the animal's eyes. "Come on," she whispered. "Come to the light." The bay followed. They stumbled into the yard just as part of the loft collapsed behind them. Thomas caught Myra by the shoulders. For one unguarded instant, his fear showed naked on his face. "You could have died," he said. "So could your horse." "It is a horse. It trusted me." His hands trembled once before he let go. Across the yard, beyond the reach of firelight, hoofbeats fled toward the north road. The barn burned until midnight. By dawn, Thomas had lost half his hay, 2 saddles, and the winter grain. Myra's letter survived, smoke-stained but readable. So did the threat. Sheriff Russ came when Mrs. Calder rode hard to town and dragged him out herself. He read the letter. He examined the burned barn. He listened as Thomas described the shot from the loft. For the first time, the sheriff's questions sounded like belief. But belief did not mean danger. The payroll train would come the next evening. Pike remained in town, smooth and mournful, claiming outrage that criminals had used his name. Judd and Silas were missing. A scarred stranger had bought cartridges at dawn. Sheriff Russ wanted to gather a posse and search north, but the old freight roads split into cattle paths, washes, and cedar breaks. Without the route book, they might lose hours. Myra stood beside the blackened barn and looked west, where the prairie rolled towards Split Rock. "I can find it," she said. Thomas turned. "No, my father taught me signs. Wheel marks carved under ledges, stone stacks near washes, red paint on cedar bark. I did not know what they were then, but I remember." "No, Thomas, no." His voice broke harder than he meant it to. He looked away, jaw tight. "They asked for you by name. They fired into my barn with you inside. You think I will drive you out there like bait?" Myra's own fear rose, but beneath it was something stronger. "They already used me as bait, for gossip, for lies, for every decent person in town who needed someone small enough to blame. I will not sit in your kitchen while they use my father's road to steal and leave his name tangled in it." Sheriff Russ shifted uneasily. "Miss Bell, I cannot order you." "No," she said. "You cannot." Thomas walked toward the ruined barn, then stopped. His shoulders looked older in the morning light. Myra followed more softly. "You once said my name was not buried. Help me prove it." He stared at the blackened boards. "I buried my wife because I thought I knew better than weather." Myra went still. He had never spoken of her. Thomas swallowed. "We were coming west. I pushed through a storm to reach shelter before dark. She wanted to stop. I said the road would hold. The wagon tipped and her washed. Fever took her after. Since then, I do not gamble with lives on roads I do not trust." The anger went out of Myra. "I am sorry. I cannot watch another woman ride into danger because of a road. That is not why I fear it." The words stayed between them, quiet and unfinished. Myra wanted to reach for him, but earned affection was not taken in desperate moments. It was built with care, and care sometimes meant standing firm. "I will go with the sheriff if you will not," she said. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the decision had cost him. "Then I go." He sacrificed more than safety that day. In town, before witnesses, Thomas sold 20 head of cattle below worth to buy horses and supplies for the posse after losing his barn stores. When Pike hinted that Thomas was ruining himself over a disgraced girl, Thomas removed his gloves and laid them on the freight counter. "My reputation is not so fine. It needs protecting from the truth," he said. "Hers is." The words traveled through the gathered crowd. Myra stood near the door, hearing not romance, not flattery, but something sturdier. He had placed his standing, his money, and his winter comfort on the line without asking if she would love him for it. That made it harder to breathe than any sweet confession could have. They rode at noon. Sheriff Russ, Thomas, Myra, Mrs. Calder's nephew, Eli, and 4 men shamed enough by their earlier silence to join. Myra carried her father's red signal lamp wrapped in cloth, a canteen, and the smoke-stained letter inside her bodice. Thomas rode beside her, not ahead. They found the first mark at Split Rock, a crooked wheel coughed beneath an overhang, nearly hidden by lichen. Myra slid from the saddle and touched it with 2 fingers. For a moment she was a child again, riding on her father's wagon, listening to him sing under his breath while the wheels creaked. This way, she said. The old road appeared and vanished, no more than heart-packed memory through grass. It crossed a wash, climbed a ridge, and slipped into cedar. Twice Myra stopped, uncertain. Twice Thomas waited without pressing her. Near sundown, they reached a high place overlooking the dry crossing. Below, 3 wagons stood hidden among cottonwoods. Men moved around them with rifles. Judd Mercer was there. Silas, too, the scarred stranger, and Norris Pike, no longer wearing his church face, stood beside a strongbox wagon marked with railroad paint. The robbery had already begun. The payroll train was not due for another hour, but Pike's men had forced 2 railroad guards from a maintenance handcar and tied them near the creek. They meant to signal the train with a lantern, stop it before the grade, and claim track damage ahead. Sheriff Russ swore under his breath, "We are outnumbered." Thomas looked at the sky. Dusk was thickening. Can we circle? Not before the train. Myra unwrapped the red signal lamp. Thomas saw what she intended. "Myra, my father stopped a runaway car with this light." That was different. Yes, she said. "He dies saving a platform full of people who never learned his name right. I will not let his lamp be used by cowards." Before he could stop her, Myra slid down the slope into the cedar shadows. She moved as she had moved all her life at dusk, silent with a lantern in hand. She reached the lower rocks just as Pike lifted a green signal lamp stolen from the freight office. Green meant safe. Green meant come ahead. Myra climbed onto the old road embankment where the train crew could see her first. Then she lit the red lamp. The glow bloomed in the falling dark like a warning star. Pike shouted, "Men turn!" A rifle cracked, splintering stone near her feet. Myra did not run. She swung the red lamp in the old danger arc her father had taught her. Across, down, across again. The train whistle screamed from the east. Thomas rode out of the cedar then, firing into the air to draw eyes from Myra. The sheriff and posse charged from the ridge. Horses flung down through brush. Men scattered. Judd tried to whip the wagon team forward, but Eli shot the lead trace clean through, and the harness tangled. Silas ran for the old road, only to find Mrs. Calder herself blocking it with a shotgun across her saddle, having followed at a distance because, as she later said, men left alone with plans often forgot sense. Pike seized Myra from behind. The red lamp fell, but did not break. His arm locked around her throat, his pistol at her side. "Call them off," he shouted, "or the lantern girl goes dark." Thomas reined in so hard his horse slid. For one terrible moment, the whole world narrowed to Pike's breath, the pistol and Thomas's face in the dust. Myra felt the smoke-stained letter crackle inside her dress. She thought of her stolen ticket, the train she had missed, the town that believed lies because lies were easier than defending a poor girl. She thought of Thomas selling cattle, standing in church dust, waiting beside every silence until she could speak for herself. She stopped fighting Pike's grip, then she brought her boot down with all her strength on his instep and drove her elbow back into his ribs. The pistol fired while Thomas moved. He was off his horse and across the road before Pike could recover. He struck Pike once, not with rage but with finality, and the clerk fell against the wagon wheel. Sheriff Rusk had him bound before he could rise. The payroll train slowed under the red warning, brakes screaming, steam pouring into the evening. No one died at the crossing. No strongbox vanished. No false green light called innocent men into ambush. And when the train crew climbed down, the first thing they saw was Myra Bell standing in the road with her father's red lamp burning at her feet. By midnight, Calico Ben had learned another story. This one moves slower because truth often has to walk where lies ride horseback. But it arrived all the same. Norris Pike had altered Mara's letter and forged her hand to hide stolen freight payments. Judd Mercer had supplied false ink, false invoices, and wagon teams. Silas Creel had carried messages between Pike and the scarred stranger, a wanted road thief named Len Shaw. The old freight road had been marked years ago by Mara's father for emergency routes during washouts. Pike had found mention of it in Harmon's records and needed Mara to guide them after stealing the route book. The books were recovered from Judd's wagon, along with Mara's $6, her ticket receipt, and 3 bundles of railroad cash. Sheriff Russ made his apologies in front of the freight office because Mrs. Calder informed him that private apologies were for private mistakes. "I should have listened better," he told Mara, hat in hand. Mara stood on the platform where she had once been shamed and looked at the faces gathered below. Some were sorry, some were embarrassed, some looked as though they wished forgiveness could be handed out quick so they might feel clean before supper. She did not give them anger, though she had earned the right. She did not give them easy comfort either. "My father used to say a lamp does not choose who deserves the light," she said. "It only shows what is there. I thank those who stood when standing cost something. For the rest, I hope you remember that a poor girl's name is not spare kindling for a town's fear." No one spoke for a long moment. Then old Mr. Harmon stepped forward, crying without shame. He placed her father's route book in her hands. "He was the bravest man I knew," he said. "I should have said it sooner." Mara held the book to her chest. "Yes," she whispered, "you should have." Mrs. Boone in St. Joseph sent a second letter after hearing the matter explained by the railroad superintendent himself. The position remained open. The ticket would be honored. Mara read the letter at Thomas's kitchen table 3 days after the arrest, while winter wind moved softly around the repaired window frame. Thomas had begun rebuilding the barn, with help from men who had once looked away from Mara on the platform. He accepted their labor without pretending it erased everything. Forgiveness, like fence work, needed posts set deep and time to hold. Mara found him near sunset fitting a new crossbeam. His sleeves were rolled, his hair damp at the temples, and sawdust clung to his coat. "The letter came," she said. He set down the hammer. "St. Joseph?" "Yes, well, it is." The words stood politely between them. "Dressed like strangers." Thomas looked toward the west pasture. "You earned that future." "I know." He nodded, and the restraint in him hurt her because it was not coldness. It was love refusing to become a cage. "I can drive you to the train when the day comes," he said. Mara looked at the half-built barn. The new stack of hay neighbors had brought, the kitchen window where her lamps burned clear each night. She thought of the dressmaker's shop waiting in St. Joseph, the room over it. The chance to become someone no one in Calico Bend could shame. She still wanted that. A future should be chosen, not surrendered because a man had kind eyes. "Thomas," she said, "why did you ask me to walk out of the freight office that night?" He looked down at his hands. "Because you signaled danger. Only that?" "No." She waited. He picked up a nail, turned it once, then set it down. "Because I had watched you light lamps in weather that sent grown men indoors. Because when boys mocked you for soot on your dress, you kept your chin level. Because once, when Harmon shorted your pay by mistake, you corrected the account without making him feel small. I thought if such a woman looked afraid, there was good reason." Mara's eyes filled, but she smiled a little. "That is a long answer. I have had weeks to shorten it and failed." She stepped closer, not into his arms, not yet. Just close enough that he could no longer mistake her staying as gratitude. "I am going to St. Joseph," she said. He nodded, though pain flickered. "For 6 months," she continued. "Mrs. Boone says there is much to learn. Cutting, fitting, ordering cloth, keeping accounts for a larger shop. Thomas looked up. I do not want the future they stole from me, replaced by another person's kindness, he said. I want to stand in it first. Then, when I come back, I want to know whether there is still work for me here. His voice was rough. There will be work, and a room with a bolt, as long as you want one. And if someday I do not want the bolt, the evening wind moved through the open barn frame. Horses grazed beyond the fence. The new board smelled of pine and hope. Thomas stepped nearer then, slowly enough that she could step away. She did not. Then I will spend every day proving the door is yours to open, he said. Mara reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers as if holding something entrusted, not taken. She left for St. Joseph the following week. Calico Ben came to the depot to see her off, though not all deserved the privilege. Mr. Harmon gave her a parcel of sandwiches. Mrs. Calder gave her a sewing needle wrapped in scripture paper and told her not to marry any fool who feared a strong woman. Sheriff Russ carried her trunk himself. Thomas stood apart until the whistle blew. When he handed Mara her father's red signal lamp, she shook her head. Keep it burning at the ranch. Is yours. So is the road back. That nearly undid him. The train carried her east into a life she had chosen. She worked hard in St. Joseph. She learned fine seams and hard bargaining. She sent letters to Thomas with descriptions of fabrics, street lamps, church bells, and the way city rain smelled different from prairie rain. He wrote back about calves born in snow, Mrs. Calder's mule biting, a circuit preacher, the barn rising beam by beam, and a new lantern bracket he had fixed beside the porch. 6 months passed. On a spring evening, when the prairie grass shone silver green and the road west of Calico Bend lay soft with dust, Thomas Vale saw a figure walking from the freight platform with a small trunk in one hand and a dress the color of lamplight. Beneath her traveling coat, Mara Bell had come home, not because shame drove her, not because fear cornered her, not because any man had chosen her road. She came because the road was hers. Thomas met her at the edge of town. For a moment they only stood there, smiling like two people who had learned patience the honest way. Behind them, the freight office lamps burned clear. Ahead, the west road opened toward the ranch, where a red signal lamp waited on the porch, not as a warning now, but as welcome. Mara took Thomas's hand, and together they walked into the evening dusk, past the place where Elias had once tried to end her future, toward a home lit by trust, dignity, and a lantern that no shameful man would ever put out again.